Katy, you're so welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself to listeners?
I would, and thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I've gotten a ton from the episodes I've listened to, so this will be a fun opportunity. I'm Katy Conway. I serve in the Chief People Officer role for Resources Global Professionals. We affectionately just refer to as RGP. And RGP is a global professional services firm that's really kind of bringing consulting forward in a modern way, in a somewhat different way. Our tagline is Dare to Work Differently because we are serving our clients and the consultants who work for us in a bit of a different approach.
And what is that different approach that you're using?
Yeah, the for our consultants, and I tend to focus on that very heavily from my chair. From the consultant's perspective, it is an organization that allows people to opt into opportunities so they can pursue a consulting and a professional services path in a way that gives them a lot of autonomy, flexibility, choice in the engagements that they're working on, which is different, I think, than most traditional consulting firms where there's a bit more of a scheduling or an assignment kind of focus.
Mm.
So this allows us to really understand what's important to people, certainly from a hard skills perspective, technically, functionally, but also listening and understanding about how they want to drive their career forward, whether that's from an industry vertical perspective or a functional perspective, or quite frankly, even just a lifestyle perspective.
Yeah.
And because we go about it that way, we find that we have very strong referral of talent from that group. We have strong retention, redeployment among this group, and it seems to show up with our clients a lot. They comment for us that they get strong expertise, but they get that in a way that people seem to really want to be on those engagements, and they're excited and passionate
Yeah.
about them.
That's actually a really interesting approach. Before we go any further, I'd love to dive into that idea of the consulting. So are these people employed by you? They're not contractors, are they actually employed?
They're employees, so they're our W-2 employees. Now, we operate globally, so in some countries around the world, you'll see a little bit heavier mix of independent contractor where that is more governed by the requirements or regulations in that country. But the vast majority of our business runs on an employment model. And so the easiest way to kind of think about it is we're trying to offer the benefits of gig employment, where you're selecting and opting in and choosing what you want to do, with the benefits of full-time employment, professional
Yeah.
development, enrichment, all benefits, all of those pieces.
Yeah. No, I love that as a model. I think it's really interesting, especially what you're saying about client satisfaction, because if I think of traditional consulting firms, and I think, without naming anyone, and that's probably who you're referring to, but it's this idea where, exactly like you say, people get assigned onto these specific projects, and whether they like it or not, or they might have to deal with clients who are a bit tricky, or subject matter that they're not familiar with, or whatever it might be. Really intense periods of working on projects. And I know certainly from I'm coming from kind of an agency background where we're working on clients, not necessarily on projects, on ongoing contracts and servicing those contracts. But it's a really interesting model that people get to actually choose the types of engagements that they're involved in. Do you want to talk to me a little bit more about how that came about?
Sure, sure. And listen, I am talking about those traditional global consultancies, and they're near and dear to my heart. I was part of one for many years before joining RGP. And so it's quite different to me too when I came into this environment, but I think brilliant, and I think one of our largest draws for talent. So what the large global firms, the traditional consultancies we're familiar with, do great, in my opinion. They attract top talent. They invest in that talent. They grow and develop it. They have usually very collegial and collaborative environments. So a lot to be really proud of. I experienced it in my time there. We have really tried to foster the same, and I am biased, but I would tell you, I think we've done that. We hear it on our satisfaction surveys and sentiment from employees. And yet, the piece that was missing in those traditional models was really when you looked at why are people leaving, and they were leaving with affinity for the organization and sharing positive feedback. So then why are you leaving? It was typically, it is not quite flexible enough for me in some regard. that it fits for me anymore. That could be lifestyle and the number of hours you're working. It could be where you're working. Another common sentiment was, my firm has invested a lot in me and I've become a specialist in X, Y, or Z. However, I'm starting to feel pigeonholed in that area, and that's what I get assigned on again and again. And so it could even just be from a development and growth perspective that it feels a bit too, inflexible. So for us, we said, look, if we could solve that problem, right, then we can start to really create and foster an environment that has the good in it, but and plus kind of this autonomy, choice, flexibility. So in practicality here, the hard part of that is really managing the supply side of it, right? So when you look at your skill sets that we are trying to deploy to clients, the X factor that we have to get a little bit better at is that preference piece. It's easy for us to look at a skills inventory and understand, okay, we look deep enough in these areas that match the demand our clients are bringing to us. But the part that's a little hard to account for is what happens if someone doesn't want to get on an airplane and go to that client, or those are dynamic choices that change for people at different parts in their lives. So it's something we have to keep a constant pulse on so that we're really understanding how to align people to opportunities. And I will say, if there's one silver lining that for us work-wise that came out of work changes as a result of the pandemic and people operating a bit more hybrid in a more hybrid fashion, is really benefited our consultants further and our clients, because we can deploy talent. We call it borderless talent. We can deploy talent much more in a much more agile way than we did before, because people are not requiring on-prem work 5 days a week, right? And so what it means for the client is you have a broader talent pool from which to choose, and for consultants, it makes and for my team at RGP, it makes deploying those consultants to meaningful work according to their preferences a bit more open, which is helpful.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So is this shift, this isn't necessarily a model that you had pre-pandemic. This is something that came about as a result of the pandemic, essentially, is it?
It is. I would tell you pre-pandemic, the minority by a long shot, exceptionally, our clients were hosting virtual work. And now it's certainly the majority. Many of them either fully remote and they're comfortable with that, or some kind of hybrid arrangement. That may mean going on site once or twice a week. It may be twice a month. It kind of varies by client and the nature of the work. But it has really opened the pipeline and the connection opportunities of the best talent for that opportunity, and connecting that to the client, which has been great.
Yeah, it seems like a really great opportunity for me. So, what you're saying with being able to connect people with the right opportunities as well. And this issue on, like you said, the supply side. So, not necessarily, like, if you're giving people the choice as to which clients they want to work on and they don't want to necessarily travel too much for work, depending on what their lifestyle is like, this opens up a whole new area of opportunity. And it's really great to see that the clients are open to that type of engagement as well, that they're not kind of demanding you to be on site with them.
That's right. And we have certainly seen a gamut, right? So we have seen some clients make a move back to on-premise, although I would say the majority are not doing that full time, particularly now that it is more visible and palpable to them, the benefit they receive by being able to go out to a larger talent pool where you don't have geographic boundaries and select best fit for your particular engagement.
Yeah, I love that idea. And anyone who's listened to the podcast for a while knows that I'm a little bit obsessed with this concept of fit. I talk about it more from a happiness at work perspective and an employee-employer perspective as well, and finding that best fit for people and organizations rather than client. But I think the same type of thing applies in the client situation as well.
Agreed. And I share your obsession. It's a good one to have. I kind of feel like it's everything, particularly for the topic that you're hosting your podcast on. But, we actually went through a branding exercise a couple of years ago. And so we talked to the people who work for us and we talked to our clients and said, what stands out about this organization to you? And they really talked about that, getting the fit right, the technical and the hard skills certainly. The harder part being the culture fit and the
Yes.
integration with the team,
Yeah.
right? That's really the more difficult part. But we ended up with a branding that spoke to the power of human, because we do want to take a human-centric approach. But it wasn't lost on us, and I thought it was kind of fun that when you shorten that and you say power of human, PH, it's really that chemical, it's that chemistry, right? It's that
Yeah.
fit that is kind of the secret sauce that makes a difference.
I love that. And I suppose I'm intrigued by this idea now, because running my own business, the idea is that you get to choose the clients that you work with. And I know in a lot of cases when I worked in corporate, we didn't necessarily get to choose. Certainly at the level I was on, you don't choose the clients that you work in. You know, going back to what you said earlier, you're sort of assigned onto the clients that you work with. And it wasn't always necessarily a pleasant experience. And I'm reading a book at the moment. I won't mention the name of the book. It's a little bit of a rude title, but I'll put the link in the show notes, so I won't mention the name of the book. But in it, the man talks about it. It's by Robert Sutton. I don't know if you know the book that I'm referring to. So in it, he talks about this idea of, it's not just thinking about people in your organization and people being toxic. It's thinking about applying that in a client situation as well. So I'm wondering whether maybe it's kind of both sides, but from your perspective, is it attracting those clients who are also human centric, or is it seeking out clients who are human centric and saying no to ones that maybe you perceive are not aligned with your own company values?
That's an interesting question. You know, I think certainly there's a draw for clients that understand the value of the right chemistry or fit of a team, right,
Yeah.
to execute and get their most important initiatives done. Now, they may all approach that a little bit differently, right? For some, it's going to be a very human-centric approach. For others, it may be a much more pragmatic, results-oriented approach. But I do think the other shift we are seeing, and a lot of data points to this coming out of the pandemic, is people understanding the criticality of empathy at work, of fit at work. So even leaders that, and you know, you see differences generationally by workers, right? Even groups that are not going to be wired or use language that's about human centric or human first. I think that in business, what everybody can appreciate is we have imperatives, you know, pretty important initiatives we need to bring across the line. We need good thinking on those, but we need strong execution and, quite frankly, return on those projects. And so getting the right team and mix of people, I think increasingly is becoming a focus for organizations to understand how important that piece is. And so, you know, I think clients approach it differently. We have a lot of clients, and I'm super grateful for this, that do take a very human-centric approach. But even those that might look at it a bit differently, much more outcome-based, I think when you're in a global talent shortage and doesn't look like we're going to be out of that anytime soon, I think people are starting to have an appreciation for the importance of you know, being focused on people, right fit, making sure people have what they need to work well, hopefully being able to show up authentically at work and be seen and recognized for their contribution, all the pieces that are important.
Yeah. All of these things that we're seeing, I think recently, they're getting a lot more airtime, I think, recently. And you know, some people might think it's flash in the pan or it's something that's just a temporary thing. But for me, I think it is the future of work, and we're starting to see that already. Leaders being more authentic and showing their level of vulnerability, their humanness, in their interactions with people. I think it's really important. Coming back to this idea of the right team and the right mix, how do you go about getting that right?
Yeah, it's tricky for sure. And so I would tell you, our process has really been, it starts with understanding what's important to our client. And again, it feels, and this is not always true, but it feels that the easiest part of that to qualify and satisfy are technical and functional skills. The harder part of that is that chemistry and that mix. And you know, so for us, when we're talking to a client and we're trying to understand what it is that you're trying to achieve, what does success look like, we're talking about that pragmatically in terms of outcomes, but we do start to drill into how teams work together, what the values of that organization are. Tell us about what success looks like when you have a group of people working together. Tell us about some of the pieces where you've seen that challenged, and why. And if you can get a good understanding of that, it helps us to not only qualify who we should, how we should create that team that's going to be deployed on that engagement. But I think it also really helps us set the expectations of the consultant going on to that engagement. So I like people to go in eyes wide open and really think about fit, and is this going to make sense for you? Are you going to be happy in this type of an environment? This is how the group communicates. These are expectations. This is how deliverables, milestones, et cetera, are communicated. How do we handle challenges? Because every project's going to have them, right? Absolutely. The hope is not we don't have them. The hope is we can work through them pretty seamlessly as a team and still like each other at the end.
Yes.
So we try to test for all that as we go in. And it's really quite interesting. I think the more forthcoming you can be with people about that, the more you understand it. I have found in my experience, people will self-select, right? They will opt in or out and say, that's not probably how I ideally like to work and best fit for me. Let's look for the next one, and we'll get there.
But it's really great that they have that opportunity and they have that visibility, and that you test for these specific challenges. And like you say, it's not that you're wishing that there's no challenges at all, but that you come out the other side and you're still speaking to each other, and maybe that you've learned a thing or two about working together or working in a team or the client or handling difficult situations, whatever it might be. I'd love to know if you're open to sharing, if there's any times where maybe it's kind of, you've got it wrong, let's say, or someone has put their hand up for an assignment and maybe it hasn't been a great fit.
For sure. I mean, it's the people business. So every day has a little unplanned adventure, but we have for sure. And so the way that we try to approach that is of course, first to seek to understand, and where can we course correct? And that's typically not on one side, right? So are there some ways we need to interact among the team differently from an individual perspective, but certainly with our clients as well? When you can have kind of radical candor around that and really talk in a way, and there's trust, right? There's a way that we're doing this so that we can make sure we're going to deliver and execute on this project. But how we get there and the impact it has on every team member is also a pretty important decision factor for us, or consideration for us. So a lot of times through that dialogue, things get course corrected. There are times where they don't. And sometimes it's a fit issue. Sometimes, of course, in the people business, something personally happens in someone's life where they're not going to be able to see an engagement through. And that's why these relationships, both with client and with consultants, are so important. It's really just, the trust is critical to work through that. And we've been able to. So I think about an instance I worked through recently where somebody had just a really difficult something very difficult happened in their personal life and understandably needed to step away for a period. And that was on a project that had really critical and tight time deadlines on it. And so we were able to get the consultant, our employee, some support as they stepped away and dealt with the personal issue, and at the same time do a handoff with a new consultant who would come in, help that person ramp quickly. The client was great and understood we were going to need to take a quick beat to get that person up to speed. The whole team, both client and other RGP consultants, rallied around them. And then we jumped in and continued to carry forward. So it's definitely not a one size fits all in terms of how we approach them. It's pretty situation specific.
Yeah.
But I think, again, if you enter that with empathy, solution orientation, what's going to be the solution that fits multiple parties, the consultant, the client, RGP, kind of usually it's always a three-pronged approach that we have to think through.
Yeah.
We usually get there.
Love that. It's, yeah, and like you're saying, the people business, and it's having to take into consideration all of these different aspects. But it's really great to have those relationships with your clients, that they're accepting of that and they're by the sounds of it, majority people focused and human centric businesses, so they kind of get it when someone needs to step away for personal reasons. I think it's really great.
For
The
sure.
the other thing that we touched on a little bit earlier, and we talked about it a little bit before we started recording, Katy, was this idea of hybrid working. And it's a question I get all the time. And a lot of people I speak to are looking to find the solution, maybe the one size fits all, as to what's working in hybrid and what the future is. Now, my response generally is listen to your own employees. Don't be looking to what other people are doing. But I think it's always interesting to hear what's working in other organizations. So when you had to go through this seismic shift, let's say, during the pandemic, where suddenly everything is done remotely, and now you're moving more towards this hybrid model, what are the big challenges, and what do you see as working for you?
Sure. Yeah, it definitely was a curveball for me and for the organization when this just turned on a dime, But I will tell you what's working for us is firstly starting from a place of I too wish there were a silver bullet to this solution, and there's not. I've come to accept that. And so it's a real learning opportunity and growth opportunity. For us, we tend to really want to be a listening organization. We're a human capital firm, so what the sentiment of our people is at the heart of it. And so it was really in early days taking cues from both stakeholders, clients and consultants, about how we were going to navigate this uncharted territory. And so we started that. Thankfully, we had a lot of collaboration tools already in place, so we didn't have to scramble as much as some organizations did to get Zoom and to get Teams and other things in. We had already been kind of pursuing early days of a digital transformation. And so that we're very grateful for that. As we learned in very early days, we had to work with our people to find best practices around how to work across those collaboration tools. I don't know if you found this in your work or your team, but it felt a bit overwhelming at first. So what felt like a lot of email and phone traffic, now you've got chat traffic, and now you've got like collaboration tool. And it's like, boy, I don't know if I can keep up with all the forums. So really finding out how you were kind of rules of engagement at each different project about what are we going to use, how are we going to use it. Let's make sure we make this useful and not more of a burden, as we all have to figure out how to work a little bit differently. We started to pulse our people to really understand preferences as we got into, I would say midway through the pandemic. What is feeling like the right mix for flexibility for you? Is it partial on-site? Is it fully remote? And as you would expect with people, it was all across the board for different groups, but it was helpful to understand where we had critical mass. And it was also, this feels like a really common sense learning, but we had to step back and say, these are dynamic preferences, right? So for a lot of our workers, maybe being partially remote and partially on site was great September through May. But maybe in the summer, if I have school-age kids who are at home all the time now, maybe I want to be a little bit more on-prem because it's hard to work with everybody in the space. So it was dynamic even among people. And so taking a regular pulse and watching that data was important for us. So just, I think there were quite a few learnings, even as we hired and onboarded people. That was an area of great learning, because all of a sudden you can't necessarily be in the office and sitting side by side with somebody new to the organization. So we really leaned on something that's been serving us well for a while now, user-centered design, and just started by asking a lot of questions of new joiners and recent joiners. What's working, what's not, what are the pain points, and designing around that. And a really important part of user-centered design is constant iteration, and that has been super beneficial to us. So every cohort that we put through our onboarding program gives us feedback along the way, and across a group of more than 20 cohorts since 2020, we have gotten great feedback, and the program just gets better and better. It gets high satisfaction ratings, and it wasn't anything smart we did. It was them telling us, here's what's working and here's what's not, and then pivoting around that.
Yeah. And I think oftentimes companies maybe try and overcomplicate things again by looking to see what other people are doing rather than asking their own employees, well, how do you think we can fix this? Because oftentimes the answer is in their own organization already. So it's really great that you're there listening to what people are actually saying and then taking action on that feedback as well, that you have the ability to be able to pivot and change how the onboarding is delivered. How is that being delivered currently in, because I think a lot of people can maybe learn from this as well.
For sure, it's been great learning for us, and I'm happy to share it. So, we learned that some of the important features, and we're doing this with global cohorts. You have a whole assortment of time zones, kind of like you and I do today, a whole assortment of time zones and languages and all the complexities. But what we found is that having a mix of synchronous and asynchronous was super important because remember, the other complex part of this is that everybody in that cohort may be on a slightly different flexible arrangement with their
Yeah.
version of hybrid, or you may have some people that are on-prem all the time. So what became important was we can give you a schedule when you join that's going to have some pieces where we join synchronously by Zoom. So we're going to be virtual, but we all get to come together and you kind of get, as best you can, that teaming atmosphere, culture. Let's meet each other. Let's make some connections. It feels a lot less lonely when there's somebody you can reach out to that is in that same first 30-day period. And then we really started creating phases. So there were portions of it that were synchronous where we were doing kind of quote unquote live classroom training, albeit virtual. But people got the benefit of questions, they got connection, and they got just that connection, I would venture, is almost as important as the learning. The learning is going to come, but you've got to kind of set the stage, right? And so that was really helpful. That was mixed with here's some coursework we're going to ask you to do, or some learning, often by video, some kind of live interaction, but you get to do on your own time, asynchronously, wherever you need to. And just kind of when we come together in these cohort trainings, we'll be talking about these topics. So you could move at your own pace. You kind of knew when you needed to be ready for that so that you could talk and get the most out of that conversation, ask questions, do some role play, get comfortable with it. And that was quite helpful. Again, I think having the tools was a big piece of it. We ended up structuring our onboarding. So the first part of it, which we call acclimate, was really around that formalized learning and connection. And then the second part that we call accelerate really went into how do you embed some on-the-job training with this. So our learning and development team, whom I'm so proud of, they're an amazing group, really stay close to the hiring managers for the people in the cohort, and we give feedback. This is where this person is really acclimating quickly. They have great practices to share. This is maybe where they seem to be a little bit stuck. So here's what we're doing about it. And it allowed that one-on-one manager, or that hiring manager, when they were having one-on-one meetings with the person and just the normal course of business, to focus on the areas where that person needs a little bit more reinforcement, right? To give some extra support. Again, going back to, I guess the theme of today is it's not one size fits all. So what does my hire need and how can I help? And that learning and development group could just give quick cues to that so that I knew what was happening over here in their training and could relate it to their day-to-day job.
Yeah.
So that was a huge, important piece, is kind of not letting learning sit in a silo, but embedding it in the business so it's meaningful to the employee.
I think, yeah, it's really interesting, really important that if I think from a onboarding perspective, if you're receiving that feedback to say, here's where you're performing really well, I think it's important to get that feedback when you are on the job. It's maybe disheartening to hear some of the challenges, but I think if the managers approach that from the perspective that I'm here to support and help you and provide the resources for you to be able to do a better job, rather than we're here to judge you and this is what you're not doing well, I think it makes a huge difference to that onboarding process.
So true. I couldn't agree with you more. So I think it really does. It allows people to kind of pivot quickly, to learn as they go, to feel some early success. That's really important. A lot of this is about confidence.
Yeah, especially when you're starting a new job. I think, I mean, there's a few things to say about starting a new job. you feel really excited at the start. No one, no one starts a new job wanting to do a terrible job. You might feel a little bit of imposter syndrome. You might feel a little bit afraid of the challenges that are coming down the road. But if you get that positive reinforcement early, especially coming directly from your manager, I think it's really important to build that sense of confidence as you're growing on the job.
I agree with you. And with this added twist of we're not all sitting in the same room together, I think it was, having that cohort that you could reach out and talk to,
Yeah.
even if they're on the other side of the world, we're in the same boat and we know that it just fosters some connectivity, some trust, um, some pieces that are so meaningful when you want to ask an off the record question or give me some honest feedback here. Quite frankly, it just really promotes a growth mindset.
Yeah.
The other thing that came out of, I guess, both the onboarding learnings and just the learning of adapting to hybrid was, can you, from a cultural perspective, almost, this is going to sound corny, but replace the water cooler? And because we can't all walk down to the coffee maker together and shoot the breeze and really make some of those personal connections that we used to for 10 minutes a day as we take a break and then get back to it. Where does that come from? So we had to get better at that, right? So I see teams around here doing some really fun, cool things where they may just gather for kind of a non-work 30 minutes, right? This is just a connection time. Bring your coffee, your beverage, whatever you're doing right now, bring it. And we're going to be in a no work zone for 30 minutes and just connect as people. And that goes such a long way. I really believe those are pathways to people feeling comfortable enough to reach out on business topics, especially when it's a vulnerable moment. I'm struggling with how to present this to my client the right way, or I'm struggling on this problem, as I serve a brand new client, whatever it may be. You don't have to suffer alone, right? There's a whole group of people here who have been there before and can help and move you forward quickly, but you have to know them and feel comfortable reaching out. So those things
Yeah.
were important.
Yeah. And I think especially during hybrid working, or especially with people working in a remote situation, it makes that connection piece a little bit harder, and even harder if you're joining in that situation. So that you're joining a new company, you don't know anyone, you don't have that previous human to human connection with them necessarily. But it sounds like a really great opportunity to bring people together in an informal way that, that people want to connect with each other. They want to know who to reach out to when they're having problems. And like you say, it's kind of this informal channel, if you like. I'm having this problem, or I need to find a different approach to this. How can we try and solve this together?
Yes, yes. And I find it's really circular, right? Like if somebody does that for you and then you get that phone call 6 months down the road and you understand the importance of taking 10 minutes to help somebody, it kind of perpetuates itself, and that
Yeah.
momentum happens in a really helpful way. The other thing that we experienced, and I'm sure many organizations did, is that we've really been evolving our efforts and our focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion over the last several years. And that has been important just generally, kind of period, hard stop, but it's also been really important to this hybrid work environment, because the way it's played out here is one of our big goals is really to increase awareness and perspective. So we are looking at diversity as it's a competitive imperative as a human capital company. If you want to offer your clients the best solutions and diversified thinking, then you need diverse perspective and experience to bring that thinking.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the lens that we start from. And with one of our goals being, okay, if we really want to bring in diverse perspective, we also need to create moments where people can foster learning and understanding. So we've had a couple of roughly every quarter or so town halls that I would just call, town hall is probably not the greatest name, but it's just more of a learning opportunity. We typically bring in an outside speaker so that we can all just kind of hear a new perspective and learn, whether that's been on unconscious bias or neurodiversity in the workplace, or just a host of different topics, which have been fantastic. And I have found those to be not just great learning opportunities, but Again and again, we're hearing from people, I feel so connected. I feel like these are chances for us to be very vulnerable and talk to each other again, like you might in that lunch setting or at the coffee maker, as you're getting to know a colleague in person. It at least offers us a bridge to do that when we can't be in person. So on those calls, which are largely attended, you have hundreds of people on them, which makes the personal connection tough. We've learned, okay, we can do breakouts in Zoom and we can have small sessions where people are sharing only what they want, but their experience. And it has been so cool to watch. We've had a number of people totally on their own say, reach out to the others in their small breakout, those other 6 people, and say, do you guys want to get together next Friday morning for 30-minute coffee at 10 a.m. virtually and keep our conversation going? I love that. It's very grassroots and organic, but you see positive things like that happening.
Yeah, it's so nice, and I love that you're viewing DE&I as like this is something that we actually need in order to remain competitive. The way I always think of it is that the clients that you're serving should be reflected in your organization, essentially, especially at those senior levels as well. What kind of other initiatives are you doing around DE&I?
We've really we feel kind of a whole untapped opportunity that we're going to try to tackle this year, which is partnering with our clients on some of the initiatives they're taking. Our big push, we have established a DE&I council, which is a cross-functional group of employees at all different levels, and we keep it fairly small. It's 10 to 12 people who serve a 12 to 18-month term. And the purpose of this council is really to be kind of a conduit that the larger employee base can reach out to with any thoughts, concerns, ideas they want to pursue around DE&I. Again, kind of going back to that user-centered design, instead of me guessing what people want or my team, just let us ask and you tell us. So that's how we came to what people really enjoy are these moments of connectivity and learning. That's been a big one. Other things the council has been asked to work on by different people in the organization. Hey, we don't know what we like. I know what my small purview looks like from a diversity perspective, but what do we look like as a whole? The asking for, can we publish those numbers a little more? We've been doing that, which I think has been something that gets people excited. It helps us understand where we want to push and have more growth. And it shows us a lot of things to be proud of. So we tend to have a very strong representation of women at RGP, particularly in leadership roles. And I think it's exciting for a lot of people to see that and to know that. So creating a little more transparency and visibility has been a big piece of it. We have hired just in the last 6 months a senior director of DE&I, a dedicated role to focus on this. And she's really working. She's doing a wonderful job helping us, again, pulse people and say, where are our priorities? There's so much we want to do, but where are we going to prioritize? So the thinking is we'll probably push this year on employee resource groups and offering, again, more connectivity, support, understanding for groups. And so right now we're kind of architecting a process of, okay, what's the process we want to go through to figure out what those first ERGs are going to be?
Yeah, brilliant. Love that. And as someone who was involved in launching the kind of the Irish chapter of the global ERGs in one of the organizations I previously worked in, it's such a rewarding experience, I think, to have that and to be able to show allyship, to be able to show support for those underrepresented groups, you know, and just the promotion and knowledge and understanding and connection that you get from that. I think, I mean, from our entire conversation, Katy, what's really coming across is that the organisation is so good at listening to its employees. So it's not about leaders sitting around in a room and thinking, I have the solution for this, or let's try that. It's really about asking people who actually work there, asking people who will be impacted by the decisions, what do you think we should do? Or have you thought about this, or where should our priority areas be? You know, that's really, really coming across from our conversation. So it's really brilliant to see that's the stance the organization is taking.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I've become a big believer in it. I mean, selfishly, it's a lot less scary than trying to figure out the ideas by yourself. I would never purport to have the right ideas. But I've learned a lot even through that, becoming a listening organization. For example, you have to get the balance. You have to be careful of the balance. I'm not going to say get it right because I don't really know what right is, but meaning let's not fatigue people. Let's not wear them out with surveys and polls. So we try to do it in different ways. Sometimes it's a more formalized, coordinated survey at a global level. Sometimes we do small listening circles within a team or a function. And the other key learning has been start with the end in mind of what it is you're trying to know. So you're structuring those questions and in whatever form you're going to ask them correctly. And you have a way to capture and feedback what you heard to the organization. So I know, personally speaking, I'm happy to give somebody feedback as long as I know it's going to be considered. And then I'm going to hear, I want to know that you heard me.
Yeah.
And then I want some accountability around what we're going to be able to do with it. That's been really important. So last year, we conducted a global total reward survey. Tell us what's important to you and what's meaningful. And we were really clear up front and said, look, there's going to be 3 inputs to forming our evolving total rewards. One is going to be competitive benchmarking data. We are going to look externally at what our peers and the places we compete for talent are doing so that we understand that. The second, understandably, is going to be affordability because we are a for-profit business that's trying to grow. But the third, equally important input is going to be employee sentiment. What's important to you? And I would tell you more than anything that informs prioritization, because the reality is you generally want to do everything on the list, and that's not always affordable or not something that an organization can take on all at once. But we started before we ever asked for feedback by telling people that. And then we really, when we shared the feedback of what we heard with them, again said, this will be a multi-year roadmap. And so, don't expect that all these changes will happen at once, but do expect we will keep this squarely in view as we think about the changes we want to make.
Yeah, and that you'll update people as you go along and inform them before the changes are made, or let them know what's coming down the line. And if anything changes, then you update them again to say, listen, this hasn't happened because of XYZ reason. But at least you're kind of sharing that journey, and you're letting people know. If I think back to some organizations that I worked in the past, they might carry out a survey. We tell them everything as honestly as we can of what we think needs to change in the organization, but then nothing happens. There's no update about what the overall feedback was, what the consensus was, nor is there any sort of action taken to address any of the issues either. So it's really great to see this in practice, to see people actually listening to the organization, listening to employees about what's going on and what we should do. I'm kind of conscious of time here, although we could probably talk about this topic for a long time. I really appreciate your time today, Katy. The question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast: what does being happier at work mean to you?
Oh, I love that question. For me, it is really understanding my purpose and how I can contribute and make an impact at the organization I'm serving, and doing that in a place that is supportive of that effort, will invest in me. I can be very authentic as I show up at work about what's going on at work and home now that that's more blurry than ever. And that I'm doing that with a group of people who have shared values and a real, for me, emphasis on the importance of people. What we do is just as important as who we do it with and how we get there.
Yeah.
So it's really kind of a combination of all those things.
Brilliant. I love it. And if people want to find out more about RGP and you personally, what's the best way they can connect?
Oh, thank you. We would love to hear from them. And so rgp.com has a lot of information about careers at RGP, about the kind of work that we deliver to our clients. So it's a great resource. And I am on LinkedIn and would welcome for people to reach out, and I'd love to hear from them.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today. Absolutely loved this chat. Really great to hear just some real insights from an organization that's actually listening to its employees and how it's coming about and the impact that that's having as well. So really, really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
I do too. Thank you for the opportunity, and I love the work you're doing.